And Carol Marine and the latest from the City Council. Carol.
Phil, thank you. The year just started and there are already controversial decisions coming out of City Hall. Regulating e-cigarettes, a proposal to delay the charter school expansion vote, and the prospect of no longer using the services of J.P. Morgan Chase have all come before members of the City Council. Here to talk about that and more are Alderman Will Burns. He is from the 4th Ward, 35th Ward Alderman Ray Colon, Alderman Joe Moore of the 49th Ward, and 6th Ward Alderman Roderick Sawyer. Welcome, all of you, to Chicago tonight. So let's start with e-cigarettes. It means that they have to be treated like regular tobacco products, smoked outside, not inside. Only 4 aldermen voted against that ban. 2 of them are here, Alderman Sawyer and Alderman Colon. Alderman Colon, why did you vote against it?
You know, I agree, first of all, with the fact that e-cigarettes should not be available for young people under 18 years old, and they should be behind the counter and all that. But e-cigarettes, vapes and smoke are not the same. Really, during our briefings, the evidence is pretty short. It's still a very relatively new technology or product out there, and so there was a lot of deficiency in the evidence that there was actually any harm, created with e-cigarettes, and it seemed more focused on attacking the normalization of smoking indoors as opposed to if it has any real health risks. So,
and you've shared you're a smoker, right?
I've smoked until November 2nd of 2013. So
and now you are an e-cigarette smoker.
Yes.
And Brendan Riley, the alderman of the 42nd Ward, shared his story as well, saying it was really saving him from an addictive habit that he has tried to break. Same for you?
And they would never advertise the e-cigarette as being a cessation device. For some people, some people will give you a testimonial to say, yes, it's helped me quit. Others will say, no, I smoke indoors with this one and I smoke outdoors with this one. I think everyone plays it a little bit different.
Alderman Sawyer, why'd you vote against it?
I joined Alderman Colon's concern about not enough information about this yet. There was some very compelling testimony, one by Will Burns and others by Brendan Riley, both for and against the concept of e-cigarettes. I'm more inclined to side with the Brendan Riley version of the events. It's just not enough information yet. I want to hear more about the consequences, the benefits, and the negative effects of e-cigarettes.
Alderman Burns, you're the sponsor of this legislation. I put up this subject on Facebook, and it was interesting because some of the responses were, we're sick of the nanny state, the babysitter state, the ban everything state. What's the justification for banning something that really isn't tobacco?
Well, first of all, there's not a ban. So any person over the age of 18 can go and buy an e-cigarette tomorrow and smoke it in the privacy of their home, smoke it in their car, smoke it on the public way. The issue is that it can't be smoked indoors at a restaurant or a bar if it's
just like other cigarettes.
Just like other cigarettes. So there are 2 issues. I think my colleagues pointed out the normalization thing, and let me just say that I was a smoker. I talked about that in my testimony. My grandfather was a smoker and died of emphysema. My father was a lifelong smoker and died of a massive coronary at the age of 59. So I sympathize with my colleague who struggled with smoking because I've been there with him, and obviously with Alderman Riley. My concern is we don't want to make something cool again. I mean, for the last 20, 30 years, there's been a concerted effort to take cigarettes out of the places where everybody's hanging out and to push cigarettes to outside the bounds of kind of acceptable behavior in our society. And part of that is we don't want kids to think that it's a cool, fun thing to do. There's been pressure to get it out of movies, pressure to get it out of TV. Now you turn on television, there are actors smoking e-cigarettes on television, looking like the Marlboro Man, and I think that's dangerous because nicotine is still a dangerous chemical, and it's a very addictive one. And a number of the e-cigarette companies are owned by the tobacco companies, and I don't really trust them.
Alderman Moore, what about you? What about the notion that there's so many regulations now about don't do this and don't do that, that it exceeds the bounds of individual choice?
Well, first of all, I think we should err on the side of caution. Clearly, there are already by acknowledgement carcinogens that are inhaled through e-cigarettes. There is nicotine involved, which, as Alderman Burns has indicated, is very addictive, and we're not doing anything to e-cigarettes that we're not doing with regular tobacco. And so those who are trying to kick the habit and view e-cigarettes as an avenue to kicking the smoking habit, they're still able to use e-cigarettes anywhere that they could use regular tobacco.
But, you know, the notion of Bloomberg and the big gulp, you had an ordinance on foie gras. There were lots of different things. Ed Burke is interested in all sorts of health issues. Is that not correct? Is there a point at which City Council is overstepping the notion of individual choice?
There's clearly a line, right? I mean, this is America. We value individuals, and the individual has a place of primacy in our society. But there's also a responsibility to the society writ large. And I think this ordinance strikes that balance. And I think a number of my colleagues, I mean, we have hearings about a whole host of issues. But when it comes to increasing the cost of doing business or making things cost prohibitive or making things difficult for everyday Chicagoans, a lot of times the council will back off on actually approving those kinds of ordinances. But again, I think this ordinance strikes the appropriate balance between individual freedom and a responsibility to protect children.
I made mention of something today at council. You know, usually when there's a big vote coming up, I get lobbied very heavily by phone, by email, by letters. This one was zip. We you know, I didn't get any calls from anyone saying, you know, support this ordinance or don't support this ordinance. So I think people are really more concerned with get down the graffiti, you know, plow my snow, and don't struggle with snow. Let's get this done on a timely basis, and don't choke on that.
You read my mind, because snow is where I was going, and cold is where I was going. And let me start with this. A very good transition. Alderman Sawyer, there was some calls that I've gotten saying that the south side got less plowing than the north side. True?
No, that's not what I said when I sent out a press release. I had nothing.
Oh, and I wasn't even quoting you on that.
But you know, people have said that I had put out a press release when we had weather warmed up after the snowstorm. And the concern was that one of the drivers that I talked to called me saying he was refused salt at one of the salt locations. He was restricted to 1 load per day, and I did not know why. So I put out a press release stating that basically that it's an opportune time to get our streets salted and plowed and cleaned up right after the storm. I don't believe that there's any indication whether the north side gets plowed more than the south side. In this particular instance, I was concerned about the 6th Ward. And since I lived there my entire life, I have expectations on how the snow should be plowed once there's a storm.
Well, let me try this. Were all of the streets plowed and salted sufficiently?
So in the 4th Ward, what I found, like on Monday, the arterials were pretty passable. They weren't great, you know, but you could see patches of the concrete, right? The side streets were pretty bad on Monday. On Tuesday, the mains were great. The side streets were getting better, but not in great shape. On Wednesday, what I found was that you had some side streets that were in pretty good condition and other side streets that didn't look good at all. And that's what caused a lot of frustration in my neck of the woods, is why are the streets over there, like literally one street over would look great, and another street would have a ridge down the middle of it. And that was a problem.
The fact of the matter is we're halfway through, what is it, our salt budget at this point?
City Council allocated $20 million for snow removal. We've spent $11 million of it so far.
Right. In a city that's strapped for cash on all levels, do citizens have a right to expect the same level of plowing and salting that they saw since Jane Byrne or not?
Here's what the citizens have a right to expect, is an honest discussion with those of us in charge of running the city. This was really an unusual storm. It was made unusual by the bitterly cold temperatures that took place while the snow was still falling and that followed the storm. The fact is that road salt does not work at temperatures when it gets to the single digits and below 0. In fact, at 6 below, the salt companies themselves will acknowledge that the road salt is totally ineffective. So what do we do? Well, we should
try to convince people that that salt's not going to make a difference.
And that's what you do, is you try to educate the constituents. In my ward, we made attempts to, well, first of all, this process that the city undergoes is during the snowfall, you take care of the arterial streets, because if they're not open, the city grinds to a halt. And then, and only then, after the snowfall has stopped, do you turn your attention to the side streets. In this time, the side streets, the temperatures, by the time we got to the side streets, the temperatures had fallen, so the salt was not effective, could not melt the ice, particularly that mound in the middle of the street, and it was impossible to clear the streets as sufficiently as we would like.
New topic, charter schools. Alderman Sawyer, you would like to delay the vote on approving new charter schools for a while. Why?
I want to make sure that we can do whatever's necessary to improve our local schools. I'm not necessarily against charter schools, but I have a problem when we close 50 some odd schools and we replace some schools, and sometimes in the same neighborhood, with charter schools. I just want to make sure that we're having, like we said, an honest discussion on improving all of our schools before we start instituting more charters.
But you can't enforce that, right? This is just a recommendation to the school board.
Up to the school board.
Are you all on board with that or not?
I'm not on the resolution. And part of the reason why is that it is a recommendation from the City Council. The Chicago Board of Education has undertaken a new process to evaluate charter applications. The board, under state law, has to review charters at a certain point. Otherwise, those charters can go to the state and be approved by the state. And it takes away our ability at the city level to evaluate those charters. Here's what I will say to my colleague, Alderman Sawyer. I think what we need to do is figure out how to create high-quality schools in every neighborhood, regardless of whether they're charter or neighborhood public schools. The simple fact of the matter is that the state of Illinois has cut public education funding for the last 5 years. We have a horrible way of funding public schools, and that's why Chicago Public Schools has the financial crisis that it does. And until we figure out how to fix that, we're going to have a problem creating high-quality public schools.
One of the big things that everybody's going to have to figure out are city pensions. The state pension vote went through. There's, what is it, a $600 million balloon contribution that needs to be made for police and fire, and even then it'll only make those funds, what, 25 to 30% funded. What's going to happen on that, Alderman Colon?
You know, we have, that's something that we have to deal with this year, and I think all the members of the council have kind of looked at each other and said, yes, this is something that we have to deal with. We have to, you know.
But deal with how?
Well, you know, one of the ways.
Against it?
Well, you know, I think people were talking about putting the pause button, and you know, on all the bleeding as far as all the money that's having to be paid out, and the cost of living raises, and all these different things, and getting a handle on it.
Carol, as you know, the City Council really is powerless to address the pension issue because it's a matter of state law. So it's up to the Illinois General Assembly and the governor to work out a solution. And I believe they recognize the fact that they cannot allow the City of Chicago, the economic engine of the state of Illinois, to fall off the financial cliff. And that's exactly what will happen if this legislature doesn't step up to the plate and do the job.
Mayor Emanuel wants to put off a balloon payment until 2023. Is that good policy on pensions?
So when the legislature passed the law to put Chicago on a ramp to fully fund the pension systems, at the time that the law was passed, there was anticipation that there would have to be some smoothing of that ramp up. And given how bad the Great Recession has been, given the amount of problems that Chicago's had fiscally, it makes sense to smooth that out over time so that we can get on the right track without destroying other essential programs like snow removal.
Alderman Burns, Alderman Colon, Alderman Moore, Alderman Sawyer, thank you all for being here on Chicago Tonight. You can visit our website to learn more about e-cigarettes. Just log on to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight and click on the story to view a graphic of e-cigarette sales across the United States, along with an interview with a local doctor detailing the risks and the benefits.